Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Mark Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Mark helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Mark draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Mark Bautis. On today's show, I brought on the Bautis Financial team, John Williams, Kira Mackesy, and Kayla Waller. So today we're going to discuss the book, Die with Zero, Getting All You Can from Your Money and Your Life by Bill Perkins. So we've started this book club where we review a book, and I think the cadence has been about every other month or somewhere around then. I think we've done it for about a year. And what we've done is we've rotated where, I'll pick one, and then we just keep switching who picks the book that we'll review. This is the first one where someone actually recommended that we review this one or that we read it and get some feedback on it. So I'm looking forward to it. It's, you look at the topic, Die with Zero, and when I first heard it, I'm like, okay, that sounds a little strange. Not sure exactly what that is, but it is a financial topic, a book about, how to enjoy your life or how to get the most out of your life. And it takes a different angle than I think what a lot of people think of when it comes to like retirement income planning or what to spend money on. So I found it to be interesting. I'll kind of kick things off with just, setting up the book, and then we'll get each of your feedback on some of the different chapters. And the way that Perkins kind of outlines this book or outlays this book is he does it by a set of rules. So his first rule that he gives us in the first chapter of Optimizing Your Life is that you really want to maximize your positive real world experiences. And when he says that, what happens too often are people they'll delay their gratification for too long or even indefinitely, because what they do is they save money for experiences that they never get the chance to enjoy. He says the reason for this, or the main reason for this, is that everyone's health, generally it declines over time. But the way we approach things is that if our life is infinite or that we'll live forever. So based off of that, he asks the question, or he says, we all should think about this question is, how do we make the most of our finite time on Earth? And, he's an advisor by trade. He's also very analytical. And he looks at it as basically an equation. How do you maximize fulfillment while minimizing waste? John, I think this is something that, while we're not as rigorous as the book is when we plan with the people that we work with, we sort of look at it as from like the question of what's important to you. And I guess like, how would you kind of correlate that to, and I know it's, like I said, it's not the same, but it is, sort of the same message that, you really want to look at the important things.
Yeah. And one of the first things we talk about with prospective clients, and we talk often with our, current clients about is, this idea of kind of reframing the way that you're thinking about the planning process, or adding into it if you've never had a chance to think about it from this angle. But that is just, forget about the money. Obviously the money is important. I'm not downplaying that. But I think that many times people come to us with these concerns about running out of money in retirement, these very legit fears, that are kind of driving them to reach out to somebody. And they don't really have the opportunity to kind of say, okay, I've worked my whole life, I'm retiring, or I've been working up to this point, I have this money, and, really looking at it in a way that how can I maximize what I get out of this money? I've worked so hard for it. And, we really, really try to get that conversation going and just try to get people thinking like, okay, at the end of the day, it's not about saving taxes. It's not about, the best investment choices, but at the end of the day, you have these high level, the meaning of life, but at the end of the day, it really is important for people, I think, to sit down and really understand, like, what are they trying to achieve, at the highest level?
Yeah. And I think like, the way he puts it out there is he says it makes no sense to, let opportunities pass by because you're fearing squandering money. You really should be thinking about squandering your life. And that should be the greater worry. And, it's different for everyone. The dollar amounts differ for people. It's also what's important to you is different. Like he gave the example that he likes to travel and play in poker tournaments. So what he does is he spends a lot of his time on doing that. And you really want to decide what makes you happy and convert your money into those experiences that you choose to. And, some people may be active, be adventurous. Some people, want to spend money on themselves, or they want to spend money on friends or family, or the less fortunate. And, choose your experiences purposely and deliberately is the way to do that. So, Kayla, if we start looking at that as like, all right, you want to actively think about life experiences that you want to have, how often you want to have them. What does it mean to invest in an experience? Like an experience that could mean a lot of things. What does he use to classify as experiences, and how one should approach investing in them?
In the book, he shares a lot of different little stories throughout. I think in the beginning, in this chapter, he told a story about one of his friends who, when he was in his early 20s, the friend went to Europe, but he never did, because he just didn't think it was the right time, and he wanted to delay it till later. But he always talks about how he missed out on that experience, and that his friend got to go to Europe, and all the memories from going to Europe kind of pay dividends, with investing, and how the friend gets the benefit of carrying those memories with him, but he didn't get to have that.
Yeah, I thought that whole concept of a memory dividend, and how he basically really compares it to a dividend of like a stock, where he calls it a compounds. I really found that interesting, or even resonated with me, because I can think of getting together with friends or getting together with family, and you're telling these stories of experiences that you've had together. And it's like, sometimes it's the same story that, every year that you're talking about. And what he does, which is interesting too, is he tries to quantify them and say that, yeah, these things are really quantifiable, and you can attach a value to them, and that they compound, because when you tell it, you're sharing it with someone. And that whole sharing it is an experience in itself. So not only did you get to live the experience, you get to relive the memory of telling that.
That made me think of how I think most of the social media companies do it, how it'll say 1 year ago and then show you a memory. That's kind of the same thing. Yeah.
You get those from like Google Photos or Photos all the time. And I think also what he does say too is, the earlier you start with these investing in experiences, the more you'll get out of them over your lifetime. So he calls it like I think he says it's even like the Warren Buffett equation, where invest early and you'll be surprised how much you have over invested over your life's experiences. So I thought that was interesting too. All right. So now we're kind of looking at this book where, forget the headline, the title of it, Die with Zero, because it's a little bit not really representative of what he's talking about. But as we're talking with experiences, he then talks about rule number 3 is aim to die with zero. Now, doesn't mean that he wants people to die penniless and run out of money. But what is he trying to get to with that? And that, like I said, that is the title of the book, Die with Zero.
Like you were just kind of saying, he was saying that you want to start enjoying things now rather than waiting until you retire. It's like possessions make you happy for a little while, but experiences will yield dividends, like we were just talking about. And similar thing, he shared a story about one of his friends who later became a millionaire, and he didn't even enjoy the work he was doing. The guy just kept working and working. And at the end of it, you're just going to wind up with a lot of money that you worked and you didn't enjoy doing it. You're putting in your time for the money that you're not going to do anything with it.
Yeah. And I think he also gives the, example about, let's say you die with $1 million, that's $1 million of experiences that you didn't have. And it makes sense to generate those or those experiences are worth something. So spend that money. Now, the two things that come up with that is people are going to say, well, what happens if I miscalculate? No, obviously no one knows when they're going to die, but if they try and spend and then they're off, I think that's one of the fears, right? I know that's a fear that of most people that we talk to is running out of money, right? So now you're trying to almost like target it and say, let's run out of money. And then the second part is, well, I want to leave some for my kids or for my grandkids or a legacy. So John, how do you actually do this? Like, is there a method to really spend what you have and one kind of float that, okay, I'm not going to die with a lot, but I'm not going to run out of money before I do?
Well, it's obviously at the heart of what we do for people. And there's a lot that goes into, making sure that you're spending the right amounts and taking distributions properly and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's really hard to kind of explain that in detail, but I think at a high level, what you're looking at is the planning process and shifting it back to, okay, let's decide what we want to do first, and then try to plan properly to get to that point, right? So I think it all kind of starts with understanding that, hey, look, if you're, and just using retirement. I mean, I know this can go, this whole idea and thought can start way before retirement, but you're looking at retirement by itself. If you look at that and say, all right, I want to make sure that you kind of take this shift and the idea of dying with zero and start there and then plan around it, as opposed to saying, all right, let's do anything and everything we possibly can to preserve our wealth and spend as little as possible. Oh, and by the way, if we think we can and we get around to it, let's have some of these experiences. And I think it just all kind of starts with that. And, there's tools that can be used. He talks a lot about like annuities. For those of it who have maybe looked at annuities or talked to annuities, I know everyone here on this call knows that the details around annuities can be quite lengthy, and there's a lot of different types. But at the end of the day, an annuity is an insurance product that helps with longevity risk. And what we're really talking about is longevity, because at the end of the day, nobody knows when they're going to die. We know we're going to die, but nobody knows when they're going to die. So the idea is if we don't know when we're going to die, how long is our runway? How long do we have to be able to spend? And annuity is, as an insurance product, basically you're paying a sum of money to an insurance company. They pool it together, and then the idea is that they will give you a payment on a monthly basis for the rest of your life. Let's say there are different options, but let's say for the rest of your life. Now, the idea is because, person A versus person B, person A, let's say they don't live as long as they thought and they die at, let's say, 65. And let's say person B lives a lot longer than maybe they thought. Person A, unfortunately, is going to be funding person B's long life. So in a lot of insurance, if you really think about it, works that way. Like, if you have car insurance, you might pay into car insurance your entire life, never have an accident, and you don't see a penny of that. But at the end of the day, if there is an accident, you want to make sure that you have enough money. It's great benefit to be able to just have that lump sum of money that's available. So, paying that annuity. The problem with the other side of the annuity is you do get that payment, but you give up access to the money. So once you pay that lump sum, that payment is there, but you don't have access to the money. So you do lose control of the money, which is a really hard thing for some people to wrap their heads around, and is an important part of the process, and somebody knowing that. So he also talks about not necessarily taking your entire life savings and putting it into an annuity, but maybe some of it. And, again, this kind of goes back to the planning process. The other part is as advisors, we've seen this 4% rule. A good advisor is going to not just look at the 4% rule, because it's a very general way of looking at it. And what basically that is taking 4% of your savings. And the idea is as long as you take 4% of your total investable assets or spendable assets, you'll have, a 95% chance, give or take, over the next 30 years of not running out of money. And there's different approaches to this, but a good advisor is going to make sure that you're staying within almost like guardrails, that you're not spending too much, not spending too little. And I think that the key takeaway really should be is if you sit down with someone, make the decision, really, really give a lot of thought to what you want to do in your retirement or with your money, and then plan around that. Those are just a couple of the tools. There's a lot of other approaches, but I think the idea is that there are tools available to kind of get you there and get you as close as possible.
And I think the second area of pushback he says is around leaving money to kids or leaving money to charities. He even starts off like that topic where he says, if you cared about someone other than yourself, you wouldn't die with zero. It's a philosophy for selfish bastards. That's what he says. So how does he address that?
He was pretty funny in this section too. He was pretty adamant about it. And the idea that, the key takeaway here, I think, is if you want to spend money on those, kids, charity organizations, do it while you're alive. You at least then have the joy of seeing your money do good work. He even adds to, he gave some examples of the idea that the inheritance that, let's say, your kids might get from you after you die, the chances are you're going to die when you're, let's say 70s, 80s, whatever it may be. Your kids are older then. And at that point, as they get older, the money is less and less meaningful to them. Even so they get, you might have it might be common for someone to come to us who just wants help with an inheritance, then they're in their 50s and their kids are already, at college, and there might be stories of like, oh wow, this money would have been really useful 20, 30 years ago, or even a portion of it. So I think the key takeaway is again, it kind of goes back to that planning process. I think that you really just sit down and be like, hey, you know what? I do want to spend money while I'm alive on those that I love and my charities. And then, okay. And then now we have something to work with. What does that look like? And then we can plan around those things. But if your inheritance plan is just to like spend as little as possible and then just let it fall off at the end, I think the idea is that it's backwards, the approach.
Yeah. He talks about how timing is everything. And I think this is one of the parts of the book that, while looking at things analytically and quantitatively, it's tough and challenging. He uses, like you mentioned, he says the most common age that people receive an inheritance is 60 years old. Yet, I think he says 30 is the peak utility age to get maximum enjoyment out of that money. And then when someone's 60, they're not able to get the same amount out of that. Now, so what that would mean is, if what he's saying is that, give the money when it has the most impact, right? That's obviously younger than when someone dies. But now you're in that challenge of going back to that mindset of, okay, if I give my money now, am I going to run out of it, or am I going to need it back again when I'm 60, 70, 80 years old? So I think it sounds great, but it's probably, challenging to work out. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it is a plan, and look at it from that perspective and into the minute details of, how best to, if that's what someone wants to do, give away their money while someone can have maximum enjoyment out of it. It's probably just going through the real details to make sure that there is enough for you and you can give away enough to get that maximum enjoyment out of. So it's definitely challenging to do. Now, moving on to Kira. Now he kind of goes more into the details of how best to do this. So one of the things that he talks about is you don't want to live your life on autopilot. There should be a balance, and also how should someone time bucket their life?
Time buckets are a tool for discovering like what you want your life to look like until the day that you die. And Perkins talks about how we rarely get the exact date for when we will no longer be able to do something. So whether that something is like holding your newborn child for the last time before your child learns to walk, or going to your child's high school basketball game before they graduate from high school and move on to college. But just realizing that everything fades and eventually comes to an end can make you appreciate everything more in the here and now. So being aware that your time is limited can really motivate you to make the most of your time before it's gone. So how to start a time bucket, it's 3 steps. The first step is to draw a timeline of your life from the period that you're at right now to the day that you can expect to die, or that, you obviously won't know, but you can do some time in your 80s. Or if you have some type of health condition, you can do less. If you're in really good health, you can do more. And then divide it into intervals of 5 or 10-year periods. So say it's 30 to 40 or 70 to 75. And those are your time buckets. They're just a random grouping of years. And then the second step is to think about what experiences, so that could be activities or events that you definitely want to have during your lifetime, and write them down in a list. Perkins talks about how you can't know right now everything that you'll ever want to do, especially the younger that you are doing this exercise, because new experiences and new people you meet will reveal like unexpected additional interests. Your interest will change through life. That's one of the best things about life, but you can revisit this exercise. So some of the examples for this step 2 is have a child, or run the Boston Marathon, hike the Himalayas, build a house, even something that has like a numeric to it. So like go skiing 60 times, go scuba diving 100 times, or read 1,000 books. But as you're making this list, some of these things are going to involve money. Like, so for example, if you want to dine at a Michelin star restaurant, that's going to cost you some money. But at this point, don't focus on the money, because it's just a distraction from your overall goals in life. And you want to just envision what you want your life to be like at this point. And then step 3 is to start dropping each of those pursuits into the time buckets that you have laid out on your timeline. And you want to focus on when you'd ideally have each experience. The point of doing this is to start consciously thinking about planning for your years ahead. Obviously, you have to take into account money, health, and time. And like the big thing with time is like the more you work, the less time you have to do these activities. But this is a way more proactive approach to the contrary, which would be like a bucket list, because in time bucketing, you're looking ahead over several coming decades of your life, and you're planning them ahead of time with the knowledge that you have of your time, your health, and your money. Like on the contrary, a bucket list is usually put together by someone who's like, knows they're going to die. Like maybe they have a diagnosis of some kind, or maybe they just are getting really old and they just list down activities that they haven't done yet and they want to do. And that's really quick. And sometimes it's not as effective. So then the next chapter, Know Your Peak, talks a little bit more about how to make sure that you don't miss the opportunity to spend your money while you still have time on your side. If you want me to like hop into that.
Yeah. I guess even before we do that, I'll say that time bucket chapter was probably my favorite chapter in the book because, it talks about some of the things that we work with people on and their goals. But I love the approach that he takes about, like you said, it's people put together a bucket list or they put a goal list right as they're approaching retirement or as they're in their 60s, 70s. And what Perkins is saying is too late to be doing that. You should be doing that earlier so that you can plan whether it needs money or whether it needs time or whether it needs energy or something. And I like the approach of, when most people think of goals, it's I want to put my kids through college, I want to retire, I want to do this. But he goes into even more detail on those, and he obviously uses the word experiences. So I think that's something that even helps us as planners to kind of, when we work with people, to think of it help them think of it in that terms, not just these big goals that maybe down the road that are hard to visualize, but even like, what's important or what type of experiences do you want to have? So I really enjoyed that chapter. But yeah, let's move on to the how to know when your peak is.
So peak is like related to your net worth. So Perkins talks about how your net worth changes throughout your lifetime. Usually it slowly but surely trends upward. And the goal in Die with Zero is for then it to trend downward, because there should be a peak when you're talking in the topic of this book, because from this author's perspective, the overarching goal everyone should have is to maximize their lifetime fulfillment. You want to convert your life energy to experiences, and you want to die with zero money, so that your net worth would look like a trend upward, a peak, and then a trend downward until you die. To determine your peak, you have to remember that enjoying experiences requires that combination I mentioned: money, free time, and health. You need all three, and money alone is never enough. So he uses an example that $2.5 million does buy you a better quality of life than $2 million, but that's only if all other things are equal. If all other things are not equal, which they usually aren't, every additional day that you spend working to accumulate that $500,000, you sacrifice an equivalent amount of free time. And during that time that you're working to make that money, your health is gradually declining. So he and his team did a bunch of experiments, and they've ran a lot of data, and they found that the optimal net worth peak occurs sometime between the ages of 45 to 60 years old. And this is interesting because most people retire after 60. They usually retire around the time that they can collect Social Security. But for most people, waiting until they're past that age range causes less fulfillment results because they end up dying with more than that zero amount. They run out of time to have all those fulfilling experiences with that money. So basically, in conclusion, in order to get the most amount out of your money in your life, you have to deliberately determine the date of your peak so you can start spending more of that money to have those experiences.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And I think even one of the stats that he uses earlier in the book, he says a third of all people's net worth they retire and it just continues to increase over time. And I know, Kayla, we see that a lot when we're running projections or scenarios for people where we'll look at it and we'll see, whoa, it just slopes upwards in retirement. And we want to like double check and we say, okay, are we missing something? And no, it's just the way it is for a lot of people. They just can't or don't spend, all the money that they have. So yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And the other thing he said in the chapter, which I thought was good too, he says, figure out when the optimal or the best time to stop working is. And the quote he uses is, no one's ever on their deathbed and says, wow, I really wish I would have worked more in the office. And if you think about that, that's, I think people should approach that whole concept of retirement or stopping working a little bit differently. Either we're conditioned to stop at a certain time. Sometimes it's around Social Security. Sometimes it's just, what is the stigma around when I should stop? But I think we saw it a little bit more during the pandemic, where people were saying, no, tell me when is the soonest time that I can either pare down my work or stop my work. And, we'll see if that trend continues as the pandemic is over. But I thought that was interesting that people were actually thinking about it a little bit differently. All right. So before we conclude, I want to get everyone's opinion on the book, because like I said, it is an interesting topic. We are in this area of, people's, not, I think maybe on the energy experiences side, but Kayla, I'll start with you. What overall thoughts on the book? Is it applicable? Is it practical?
Yeah, I liked it overall. I liked the message that you don't need to wait until you retire to start doing things. You should start enjoying things now. Well, it's certainly not applicable to like everybody, because not everyone has the net worth to be able to do that. But it's interesting to think about, especially being so far out from retirement, about how to think about these things. But yeah, I did like it. I don't think necessarily dying with exactly zero would probably make the most sense, but yeah. I did like it.
Okay. And John, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I tried, I think because this is very much what we do, I tried to kind of take my advisor hat off and just try to think about this in a way that kind of like shadow over it. Because I think we as advisors, one of the things that we're always thinking about is like, we have to protect our clients. We have to make sure we're being, making the right decisions for them. So just the idea of thinking, like to Kayla's point, like to think of us coming in and be like, oh, and then by the way, we're planning for you to not have any money when you die, like you laugh about it, but at the same time, it's a tough proposition. With that said, I love the idea of just, even if you don't take it as far as maybe he advises, I think that it's a great exercise and a great way to kind of push yourself in that direction, and continue to push yourself in that direction. At a personal level, I see my parents, and I think that there is some value in the fact that they're seeing them and they're so close to you. Like, you want them to enjoy yourself, and you want them to be able to experience, whether it be our kids, their grandkids, and just, maximize the time that we have with them. And I can really see how it is also on the other side, really hard to kind of get into that frame of mind, to really, and I don't think a lot of people ever offer this as a way to kind of say, hey, look, before we get down the road too far, let's try to think about, what are these things that are important to you? What do you want to do? Like, what are some of these experiences? What is that bucket list? Like, what are these things? And let's get them in the plan. Let's plan to actually, and, to all the things that Kira was talking about, let's make sure we do them while you still can too. And I think that that's a really, really important lesson. And I think it's at the end of the day, I love the idea of just pushing people in that direction, away from always thinking about protecting their money and toward this idea of building the maximum amount of experiences they can before it's too late.
Yeah. And Kira, what was your take?
I think for me, this was like an exciting way to think about retirement. For me at my age, like, retirement sounds kind of scary. I'm in my late 20s, and it's something that, like, I just feel like it's like the elephant in the room for a lot of people my age. But thinking about it as all the experiences and activities that you can look forward to, or just the thought that, like, once your wealth is accumulated, you can spend it down, and hopefully in a faster rate that you have your whole life, because you now have the opportunity to, just with like the way that money grows, especially if you're invested. I think one of the biggest takeaways from this book was just like the true value of experiences.
Yeah, I agree. I think the concept is great. I think the other thing that I love too is that you start thinking about it now, not when you're 50, 5 years before retirement or 6 years. You think about what you want to do now and then figure out how to. So the planner in me likes the approach because, and the only thing I'm kind of thinking is, okay, this is going to take a lot of planning to figure some of this stuff out. But I think, one of it is actually going through it and seeing, okay, maybe it isn't as complex as I'm thinking it is going to be to perfectly plan all this. But yeah, I love the concept, and I definitely like to see like the mentality of it from people, because I think it is a better way to think about just what do you want to do, what's important, rather than the typical, I want to do this or do, retire here or do this. You kind of think specifically about experiences that are important. And I think it's a better way of thinking about things. Well, it just about wraps up today's episode. So, like I mentioned before, this is the first one where someone recommended we read it. So we're always looking for any recommendations that anyone has on books for us to review. But yeah, thanks for tuning in today. If anyone would love to schedule a free consultation with us, you can do so at our website, bautisfinancial.com/call. And thanks again for tuning in today.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.